Hello, guys, and welcome to the latest MSC Performance Podcast. This is episode number 18, hosted by me, Mark Coulson. I'm joined today with Luke Rogers and Sonia Klukova. How are we doing, guys?
I'm good, thank you. Although I didn't have a very good sleep, randomly I live in Mint Drive. There was a video shoot for a music song at like 12:30 at night, like right outside the door. So I didn't sleep that good, but there was like a full light setup, a couple of like high-end cars, and they were singing some songs.
Wow.
That was a bit random. So I haven't slept. It was similar to WAP. I think it was Megan Thee Stallion.
Decent.
Yeah, I'm very good. I had a good sleep, and I'm ready for the questions today. Like them, thanks guys for putting some in.
Fantastic. Yeah, speaking of which, so as Sonia's just mentioned, we've sort of doing a bit of a Q&A today with some of our members who have sent some questions in. So the three questions we'll be covering. The first question is, for athletes, do you think the whole body approach or the lower upper split or any other split is more beneficial? Really interesting question. Now, I think that's one that we could spend a good amount of good amount of time on. The second question is based around the Romanian deadlift. So, would you use a raised heel for more range of motion or not? Also, he's snuck a sneaky second question here with the RDL: belt or no belt?
2 for 1.
2 for 1. That's smart. And the third question is regarding Olympic lifting. So, are the Olympic lifts beneficial to use if I'm not competing in Olympic lifting? So again, that's a really, really good question that we can expand on quite a lot. We could talk about whether they're useful for field athletes. Always a lot of controversy around that, and also sort of general pop. So 3 really sort of different questions there for us to get stuck into. So I think without further ado, we'll get stuck into those. So we'll start with the first one I read out there. So with athletes, what's the best approach? Are we doing a split where we're doing, we're sort of taking body parts, we're doing chest and triceps, we're doing legs, we're doing, something else on another day? Are we doing a second option, which is uppers and lowers, or a third option, which is full body? So this is a really interesting question, and if the guys don't mind, I'll jump in with some stuff here to start us off. So with those options, with a field-based athlete, I would never go into a complete split, really. A sort of traditional bodybuilding split where we're splitting up the body parts into one or two muscle groups a session. I would use predominantly an upper lower split, and I'll use full body as well. So the answer to the question, as always, is it depends. It depends on a few factors, but there's certain upper lowers and full body. But as I say, with the split, that's not something I'd look into too much. Just before I sort of go on a 20-minute ramble here, what about you guys? Is this, off the top of your heads, what are your thoughts with this?
I think the first thing to consider is like what they can actually commit to time-wise, because if they're only doing 3 sessions a week, upper lower doesn't quite lend itself as well. I mean, you don't have to use the week as the microcycle, but it just makes sense to do so. Especially if you've got time constraints of a job, like you might want to have Mondays an easy session or whatnot. But if you're an athlete, in particular, like 3 sessions a week, if you're doing upper lower, it doesn't lend itself that well. Then it's difficult to align with the training if you've got like a hard session that's going to change days of the week each week. So I think it varies on the person. If you do my preference is full body, but there's definitely scope to use both. And like you said, like the novelty of switching between the two can be good. With the full body, it just gets a little bit more complicated when you start to, rather than having like your low days, which might be classed as high stress days, and your uppers, which will be lower stress days, or vice versa, having to implement like higher volume, lower volume, low intensity within the full body session can become a little bit more tricky. It's probably a little bit more advanced in terms of the overarching concept. So if you're doing 4 days a week, you've got 2 lowers, one might be a hard day, and you plan that. at the start of the week, and then you've got your lighter later in the week. All of a sudden, when you're doing that within a full body 4 times a week, it gets a little bit trickier. So you need to have a really good understanding of periodization, and also a good understanding of what you respond well to. But I do prefer full body, actually. So if I had to say one or the other, I would say full body. But typically it would be upper, lower, off season, and then kind of pre and in season would get to full body.
Yeah. Generally, that's the way I'll, just to expand on what you've said there at the end, generally speaking, for myself as a rugby player, I'd use upper and lowers in the off season and pre-season, and then in season, I often drop from sort of 4 sessions or 5 sessions that I'd do in pre-season, off season. I'll drop to 3 sessions in season, where I've got 2 rugby nights a week and then a game every Saturday as well. Works a little bit better. But yeah, it's this, in terms of the periodization, as you say, it can get quite complex. But the first of all is, like you say, how many the question we ask everyone, when they first come on board in terms of programming is what can you realistically commit to? Is a big one. And as you say, if it's going to be 2 sessions a week or 3 sessions a week, are you really going to get a benefit from doing an upper lower split, or even more of a split than that? When we're talking even more of a split, really, the issue is then that, if we're coming in and training, chest and triceps, for example, we're not really training movement patterns. We're not really training, for lack of a better phrase, sport specific. So that's an important thing to take into consideration. Is there anything you sort of take into consideration, Sonia, when sort of deciding between full body or splits?
So I really like that you both kind of opened that topic of either how much time you have and the periodization, because I think the level of that person really matters. Obviously, if you can cope with lower or upper body split, and as well, obviously what season you're in, or like are you pre-season or in season, and what's the end goal? Obviously, like if you're training for hypertrophy, I would say split upper lower is better. Maybe if you're a beginner, I would say whole body approach. But as you said, like it really depends, like individualized goals and person, which we can elaborate.
What I like to think about is similar to when you talk about like vertical integration, and when we've got this like traditional block periodization that's kind of moved on now to still having elements of other things. So you're in a hypertrophy focus, but you've still got a little strength dosage and you've still got a little speed dosage. I think the same idea can kind of be applied to like full body sessions, and I think you can get a lot of benefit from doing. So let's say instead of doing an upper body session exclusively, you have an upper body dominant session in terms of like volume and hypertrophy, but you've got that little dosage of lower body work, and it could be like speed dominant with low. You might get like good recovery benefits from actually doing some movement through the lower body rather than just ignoring it altogether. And then like your other amount of work for the week is still spread out nice and evenly, but you just spreading it out into a way that's beneficial and might have more benefits than not doing anything alone.
So we've got to get out of this habit a little bit of thinking of, I think a lot of people think beginners will do full body, intermediate would do higher and lower, and then advanced would start doing split stuff, which isn't really the case. As I say, full body can be used in a very advanced method as well. I've used full body myself, in the off season, doing 5 days a week. And as Luke says,
all 3 of us do full body, don't we?
Yeah.
All 3 of us do. So it's not a beginner thing. We've all been training for a long time within our sports. So
yeah, exactly. So on those days, what I'd do is I'd have sort of 2 or 3 of those 5 days would be sort of what we'd call higher days, and then the other sort of 2 or maybe 3 would be lower days. So that's generally how how it fits in. So I think a lot of people sort of freak out about training the same muscle groups one day after another, but if the stimulus is different, then it can work really, really beneficially. So for example, like one of those days, I think Luke sort of touched upon this, one of those days might be a little bit more lower focused, and we're doing a little bit more heavier work around a squat pattern or a deadlift pattern. The upper body might be a little bit more accessory based, and then the next day it might be the uppers are going to be the heavy stuff, the lowers are going to be more the accessory work, and we can also obviously bring speed and and sort of velocity aspects into that as well.
It's like if you're interested in training still 4 days a week and it gets hard to get it in with the training, like there's a lot of good research about doing that light speed session the day before a game. And it's something I've used for powerlifting. And I know that like James from your club does it as well. Like, so if you wanted to train that amount of times, you want to train the day before, you could have like a low to medium day for the upper body. And then that low body work could just be like high speed work. So you could do some like very low volume sprints, some jumps, maybe even like some squats, but like really focus on speed output. And that'd be another way of getting like some extra lower body work in, but it's going to be a positive thing on the training rather than traditionally doing lower body the day before a game would be a car crash and no one would touch it because they're going to see it's being too taxing. Well, actually, like Mark says, doing upper body work and then doing that little bit of speed work the day before would have a good benefit to your overall performance in rugby.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's like say you're training in season, for example, and you're doing 3 full bodies, which is normally what I do. As I say, off season, pre-season, I do sometimes, or even quite often, actually split into uppers and lowers, doing two upper sessions, 2 lower sessions. Good chance to increase the frequency of hitting certain movement patterns. For example, that's twice a week I can hit some good squat patterns, and good deadlift patterns, and good bench press patterns. But in season, if I'm doing 3, for example, then it's like what is changing the stress on the CNS in those sessions and varying those a little bit. So we talk about high days and low days and things like that. So I wouldn't want to massively do a big volume session on the lowers on a Thursday or Friday if I've got a game on a Saturday. I'd look to get my volume and my intensity in earlier in the week, and a Thursday or Friday could be it could be, for example, if I'm, let's say, a Thursday, that could be quite a heavy upper body session, no dramas at all, and I'm going to recover fine for a Saturday. And then maybe the lower body stuff is sort of speed, more speed focus, low time and attention, and just focusing on velocity work. And that, as Luke said, that can even be done on a Friday, no dramas at all, really. So it's it all really is just about managing the stress and the load on the nervous system, really. So for example, an average training week for me, so I'd look at Monday would be a sort of what I'd call a moderate day, Tuesday would be a high day, and then a Thursday or sometimes a Friday would be a low day. And what I mean by that is so a Monday, the research would show that you're not fully recovered from a from a game on Saturday, but there's still you're still better off doing something than nothing, definitely. And you can still train. I think as field athletes, if we're waiting to be 100%, before we train in the gym, then we'll be waiting forever. Because as soon as that season starts, you're never 100%. I can speak from experience. So, a Monday would be sort of relatively moderate loads, but building some volume. I'll often do like a lot of kind of accessory work on a Monday. Tuesday, I'll try and train as early as possible in the morning because I'd have rugby training in the evening. So Tuesday would be actually a really heavy day, but like pretty moderate to low volume, but training as early as possible, trying to get 8-10 hours recovery in before I train in the evening. So it would be again, it would be full body, but I'd perhaps even be focusing on lowers a little bit more in terms of getting some heavy lifting in. avoiding like big, heavy eccentric work and things like that because I've got training in the evening, but, you know, heavy loads and, you know, a little bit of strength speed stuff as well with, you know, some banded stuff or, you know, some hang power cleans or some, you know, weighted, you know, jumps and things like that. And then Thursday or Friday, you know, I'd be looking at a little bit more velocity based, keeping the volume nice and low, but keeping the, you know, keeping the speed nice and sharp.
And that makes sense, like you said, like the most important thing is load management, and that makes sense from like a performance perspective on the Saturday. And then that doesn't mean that you have to do the upper lower. So that's a very beneficial split, and obviously it works for you. So
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I think you know, that we can probably round that up there, to be honest. I think, like,
I guess to touch quickly on that is if you're doing upper lower with that 3 days, like would you alternate between like lower, upper, lower than the week after, upper, lower, upper, and then it starts to conflict with your actual cycle. So if you made the decision to do upper, lower in season, you'd be pretty much just doing one lower body session a week and then doing 2 uppers. And is that the most beneficial training for your sport? If you're an athlete doing some kind of sport, it's probably going to be very lower body dominant. Is just once a week of strength training for that good enough when doing 2 uppers compared to doing the 3 days a week and adding in the other variants of lower body work? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, I'd be pretty confident saying, like, if you're training 3 times a week, it's going to be full body, you know.
Yeah.
I do, you know, I mean, there is a theory behind in season doing uppers Monday, lower Tuesday, and then full body sort of power and speed based work on a Thursday, which again could work. But for me personally, I'd rather get that full body stimulus, you know, throughout the week, really. So, like I say, even on a Monday, you know, if that means you know, even if that means I'm not getting the same amount of volume on the uppers as I would if it was just a pure upper session, I'm getting the lowers moving. It's a good chance to get, you know, my single leg work in, a little bit of volume stuff, you know, and it's just more stimulus and frequency throughout the week with the 3, really.
When you add up the volume of the microcycle versus just looking on a session by session basis, things are going to be fairly even anyway. And then your output's going to be higher on the day where you probably spread it out as well. So that's another benefit, which is why I don't think it's a beginner thing at all. If you're doing 4 lower body movements on one day, that fourth exercise, is going to be very, very taxed. It's going to be very low output. So your highest output work is going to be when you're freshest. So if you split it up across the week, you'd probably get more force output, more power. It's going to be more beneficial as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, to kind of conclude, I guess, like, you know, start thinking of sort of high days, low days, aspects like that. So, you know, if you are doing 5 days a week, you know, maybe look at 2 or 3 high days. So, for example, like, you know, a Monday, Wednesday, Friday could be a high days. So, you know, for those, you're looking at, you know, you're looking at high load, you're looking at heavy movements, and you're looking at fast, you know, explosive movements as well. Then on your Tuesday and Thursday, for example, you're looking at what we'd call a low day. Doesn't mean you're not working hard, but, you know, you're doing lower stress movements. You're doing, you know, more of your accessory type work. You maybe get unilateral work in. So, you know, it's maybe that Monday, Wednesday, Friday more bilateral focus. Tuesday, Thursday more unilateral focus. Is, you know, less load on the CNS, but a great chance to, you know, to work on those components. And obviously it can work, you know, the other way, 2 and 3 as well. You can do 2 high days, 3 lower days, and aspects like that, you know, work really well. Cool. I mean, that's an interesting one. We could probably talk all day, you know, about that. And you know, what I think we're trying to do here is not get too deep into, you know, into periodization and things like that. But yeah, essentially, I think, you know, we all probably have a bit of a preference for full body there. And then if you're doing full body, you know, as I say, don't be afraid to train, you know, similar patterns, similar muscle groups back to back. Just change the loads and the velocities in which you're working. So again, a good example there might be, as I said, you know, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, You come in, you're doing full body, you may be doing, you're starting off with, your plyo type work, your speed type work, and then you're going into heavy stuff. And you do that on your Monday, your Wednesday, your Friday. Maybe a Monday's more of a, slightly more of a squat focus. Your Wednesdays maybe slightly more of a upper, push pull focus, and your Fridays more of a deadlift hinge type pattern focus. And then in between, getting your accessories in works really well. So say off season, you can train 5 times a week. You could train 4 times a week, and you could do uppers, lowers, which again works fine. On your first lower, you could do more of a squat focus, sort of knee dominant pattern. On the second lower day, you could do more of a hinge type pattern. You could start off again with your speed, your power, and then go into your heavy work. But then you've got to try and fit the accessories in as well. So you might fit in with 1 or 2 accessories. And Luke makes a good point. By the end of that, what's the quality of your work? Towards the end there, which is a great argument. So yeah, and then you come into season and you're probably cutting the frequency down a bit, and you go 3, and then as I say, although there is a justification for doing upper Monday, lower Tuesday, full body on a Thursday, Friday, and I do, I have used that before and I do like it, based, suit certain types of people. Generally speaking, more often than not, I would go again for a full body approach. As I say, more accessory work on a Monday, a volume type stuff, heavy Tuesday AM, and then Thursday or Friday, look at a little bit more kind of speed dominant. But again, if you wanted a bit of extra frequency on the uppers, you could easily do a heavy bench on a Thursday, and dare I say even on a Friday if the volume's low enough, and be fine for a Saturday. Mm-hmm. Cool. We'll round that up there. Cool. Hopefully that helps. Like questions, it really, it's hard. You almost need the individual there. You need to find out those, that training history, that
the context.
that context, the schedule, everything like that. So, but cool. Yeah, we'll move it on. So the second question is based around the Romanian deadlift. So the question is: raised heel for more range of motion or not? We'll start with that, and then we'll go into the belt aspect as well. So, what do you guys think to this one?
So I'm gonna speak for myself. So I'm actually not quite sure for Romanian deadlift. Like, I assume that it works with the range of motion, and you probably increase them. But I would personally not use elevation. What about you, Luke?
So the problem is with the extra range of motion is like, is it beneficial range of motion? When you're talking about like the RDL in its purest form being a pure hinge pattern, is the elevated heel going to encourage a positive knee angle, or is it going to allow you to shift your center of gravity and your center of mass to be slightly forward, which then might allow you to get your shoulders slightly further over the bar, and then at the same time simultaneously push the hips back, which is one of the main things I focus on. And when we look at an RDL, I think a lot of people put too much weight through their heel, and then all of a sudden, like, too much weight's behind the bar, they're not getting over the bar nicely. So the heel can help you shift your center of mass to be slightly forward, which would then encourage you to get a little bit more over the bar. However, on the flip to that, like, some people, you add the heel, and as they're coming down there, they're increasing the range of motion, but it's through knee flexion rather than like hip flexion. So it's becoming a bit more of like a normal deadlift, which we know is not a pure hip hinge. It's a combination of knee and hip extension. So it's very individual. I, as a start-off, would prefer people to do it barefoot, because I also think you get a benefit of training barefoot and exercises that you can do. So things like trying to find even weight distribution through the feet, getting good ground through the floor. That has its own benefit itself. And then, so you're looking at the individual and you're saying, well, does the heel allow them then to get more of the weight over the bar, shifting the center of mass, which can be a benefit? Or is the heel making them bend their knees as they're coming down? So they're increasing the range of motion, but it isn't beneficial range of motion to the RDL, which is a pure hinge pattern.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever actually, felt the need to raise a heel on an RDL with someone. I certainly understand the concept behind the question. Clearly someone, it's based around someone who's struggling to get into a position that they feel is great enough to get the benefits from RDL because of a lack of mobility.
But it is Big Chris, so.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, a race deal for Chris might work, but no. I think with that, we know through the progressions in biomechanics and sports therapy that over the years that we just by doing the movement, by doing load through that hinge pattern, through that RDL pattern over time is going to increase the quality of the movement and the range of movement anyway. So if you've got someone who you're doing it flat-footed, for example, and you feel like you're not quite getting enough range, I'd potentially add some isometrics in at end range to hold that length. Do it with some eventually with some good heavy load as well, so that we're getting time and attention at end range. And I think you'll find that over time that will you should increase range a little bit there. As I said, I've gone more through that really because with people I trained in the past rather than raising the heel. I've just found doing that, adding those ISOs in at end range, eventually it will just increase. And if you're quite tight anyway, and it doesn't look like you're getting much range, it is quite a lot of range for you, if that makes sense. For your, okay, you're going to get some people don't, always focus on yourself as well with all exercises, but especially with an RDL, because you're going to get you super supple people, with those long elastic hamstrings that and you're going to need a block. They're getting the glutes are pushed back against the wall, the bars come down a long way, they're getting a real good range, and you're going to get some people who aren't going to get that range. Are
you saying Chris Hill shouldn't compare himself to a Gymshark model doing an RDL standing on 2 20-kilo bumper plates?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Right, okay, yes. Got you. You won't like that.
Move on, next. No, hopefully that answers your question, Chris. Yeah, so, yeah.
I just wanted to add one more point, actually, if you don't mind, because I also think when we're giving people exercises, the best thing we can do is to give them minimal amount of cues.
Yeah.
So when we're giving someone a squat, we want them to be upright and knees forward. If you're training someone online and they just cannot get that, if you give them exercises that allow you to give minimal cue and it just automatically gets them into the position, that can be a good thing. So for some people, elevating the heel is going to allow them to get slightly further over. For other people, it's going to be the opposite, where we elevate their toes. And that we're doing the opposite. So we're trying to give people as minimum cues as they can just to get into the positions we want them to be in. So doing the heel elevation might be a way of doing that. But like I said, for the person that asked the question, for them, it's just going to be increasing range of motion through time. And I'm not sure if the heel, it's a good thing to learn off where you should be position-wise, but eventually I think you want to be doing it barefoot.
Yeah, it's just with an RDL, it's so tempting always, whether it's kind of uncomfortable and it feels tight or using a heavy load to over flex the knee.
Yeah.
And almost forget about the hip angle and pushing the hips back.
Because people see the Gymshark models doing it, they think, shit, there's no set rule like there is with a bench press or a deadlift where it touches the floor, or there's no set thing. It's like you said, you work to within your individual flexibility.
Yeah.
But that means people think there's still a standard to it, and there isn't.
Yeah.
Like a set standard.
Individual, isn't it? Like say, if you're, if you're kind of hip and back angle are sort of hit. Well, I've got to remember we're on Spotify as well. So if you're completely flat with your back and you're in that kind of position, that might be the same level of kind of eccentric contraction and stretch as someone who's a bit more upright with shorter levers or tighter strings really. So always comes back to context and individuality really. So yeah, as I say, knowing Chris like we do, I think we'd probably we could potentially look at heels raise, but I'd probably look at adding a couple of ISOs in that bottom position, getting a good feel for it. And just over time, I think that'll increase the range there. But yeah, as Luke says, is a tricky one, because there's no, the standard isn't as clear. With a bench press, we know, even if it's a field athlete, not just a powerlifter, that we want to get up to the chest and we want to press. With the deadlift, we start from the floor and we end in a fully extended standing position. With the RDL, it's not so straightforward. So, don't necessarily judge an RDL. If you see someone doing an RDL and you think, well, they're not going low enough, they might be going low enough for them. The hamstrings might be screaming at them. So, it's very individual. So hopefully that answers your question, Chris. Cool. Should we move on to the third question?
Belt.
Sorry.
On the belt.
Yeah, he got a sneaky second question there. RDL, belt or no belt? So I know with RDL, Luke, you'll use with your powerlifters, for sort of generally speaking, higher rep work. Would you ever implement a belt for, your 6s, your 8s, your 10s?
I pretty much exclusively encourage the belt, actually, from a perspective of like force output and trying to get a good amount of load for it. I'd always opt for the belt on pretty much every exercise, because you're going to get higher output, or if you do the same weight, the RP is going to be lower than not using the belt. So from a force perspective, it's better to use the belt than not. The only times I probably wouldn't, and it might be for someone that's a little bit heavier or stronger, would be load management. And making sure that like we're self-limiting that day. So if like someone's coming in and they've done a deadlift at the start of the week and it's north of 240, 250, they're coming in and they're a little bit sore. Like the prospect of having to go heavy again on an RDL is not a good thing to be doing, maybe, or like it's just something they don't want to be doing. Maybe like keeping that session a little bit lighter, but then still wanting to get an okay RPE, you could do it beltless, and that might then facilitate recovery to go back into your main deadlift. So for most people, at least from a powerlifting perspective, RDL is going to be a secondary, third lift. And you need to make sure that it's there in the hierarchy and that you're prioritizing your main deadlift session. And if you're going heavy on your RDL and it's having a detrimental effect on your main deadlift, you're probably going a little bit too heavy, and you could do a good job of reducing down the load in touch. And one way to do that, to self-limit it, is by like you said, adding isometrics, adding in slow eccentrics, or adding beltless, and that's going to limit the amount of load on the bar. So I think you've got to keep your main deadlift as a priority, keep checking in on your performance, how you feel on that session, and then you should adjust the loading on the other days accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that as well. Very much depends on what we're trying to get out of it. So from my point of view, from sort of field athlete point of view, the RDLs, quite often used as a primary movement.
Yeah.
In which case, we will use it for heavy triples, heavy fours, heavy fives. In which case, obviously, a belt can more often than not help us produce more forces. I've got one or two athletes that just can't, just don't really get on too well with a belt, and that's fine. And also, I really like your point there about, it's a very simple way of self-regulating, sort of tonnage basically, is by saying, well, let's just get rid of the belt today. Let's just not use the belt. So for my guys, if they're in competition, especially like, for example, like in season, and this is any sport, and thinking of my athletes and thinking of myself when I'm talking about this, in season, we really want to minimize the amount of time and attention we're doing in terms of eccentric loading. So, for example, like, just to backtrack slightly on what we were talking about earlier, some people might say, I'm crazy for squatting on a Thursday when I've got a game on a Saturday. But what I might be doing is a banded safety bar squat out of the pins, for example. So on the eccentric, I'm just basically coming down with the assistance of the bands and just like not dropping, but, I'm maybe taking 2 seconds on the way down, pause for half a second, and it's like, bang, it's as much power through the concentric motion as possible.
And you're doing 3 sets of 2, so it's not going to be
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's it. I'd feel horrible on a Saturday if I'd not done any lowers on a Thursday or Friday. And I know that like 90% of rugby players would not touch lowers after Tuesday. In fact, most of them wouldn't touch lowers after Saturday. Yeah, so there we go. Obviously, got off on a bit of a tangent there, but like, what to bring it back to the question, what I'm saying is like that can be in season rather than sort of belting up on an RDL. If we want to be working at our 70 and 80%, that's a simple one that I've used before, where we just take the belt away, and then naturally that will knock a few percent off. Your field athletes aren't normally as well trained and get always the same benefits as your powerlifters with the belt, because in competition you're obviously using a belt. So like for example, Rowan, my pole vaulter, he doesn't get a lot from using a belt. It just doesn't carry over that well. But for myself and for a lot of guys in season, I might just say, actually, let's just take the belt out, or I might just keep the belt in, lower the volume. But you know what I'm trying to say? It's just just monitoring the total tonnage, and just removing a belt there could just keep you honest.
For myself, on a Saturday, I'm doing beltless deadlifts, and I hate beltless work. But the rationale for my coach was that we need extra work of practicing the skill, but I want to self-limit the loading so that you're not feeling absolutely bad coming into the start of the week. So like with my belt list, if I was doing a set, I reckon I'm about 10% down from the belt. Maybe a bit like mentally going into the session, but like it just knocks off 10%, and I still get the skill practice, and I still hit a fairly decent RPE. I'm getting decent force output, and I'm getting a good stimulus without having to go full hog like I would do on my main deadlift day.
Yeah.
So,
point. Exactly. Yeah. Good drills. Cool. Right, excellent. So moving on to question number 3. So this is to do with Olympic lifting. So real good range of questions today. So with Olympic lifting, are the Olympic lifts beneficial for anyone who is not competing in Olympic lifting? And we'll jump to our Olympic lifting extraordinaire, Sonia. So obviously you train a lot of the Olympic lifters, and you yourself have competed in Olympic lifting. What about for sort of general pop? Do the Olympic lifts have some good benefits? Would you use them?
I personally think they would have some overlap in terms of like the coordination, timing, muscle recruitment, but I'm not sure if I would I'm pretty sure I wouldn't take a complete beginner, like a novice who walks into a gym straight into Ollie lifts. Obviously, if he would be like a talented or like well-developed person, maybe he would catch the things quickly, but I think you need a certain level of strength to kind of introduce yourself with the Ollie lift. So for general population, if you want to be, I always say, if you want to learn a skill and if you want to know something new, great. But if you have a specific goal in terms of like, I want to run faster, be a bit more powerful, this is the usual things people say. There are different ways how you can do it if the Ollie lift doesn't really work well for you. But I also stand for that it's not that hard to learn it if you teach it well. And I think we kind of stand on the same statement here. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think like if you got someone coming in with your common goals, they want to get more athletic, stronger, faster. They want to lose a bit of weight. There's a lot more. There's a lot of alternatives that you could use that are less demanding skill-wise, technique-wise. For example, like in our Metcon sessions at MSC, we never use the Olympic lifts because if we're trying to create power stimulus, speed stimulus, med ball alternatives, plyo, sledge work, it's just much less technical, easier to coach. And that doesn't mean we're trying to make our lives easy. That just means that there's less risk involved for the person training.
I think the competency of the people is a big one. Like you probably can tell that if you give someone a dumbbell or a kettlebell and you see how the person is moving, like there's, you know, and if it's not good, I would probably never put that person under the barbell straight away. Like you need to have a certain level of competency of the body positioning, body movement, like, you know your hinge, know your squat, and then you can probably do something with the barbell in terms of ollie. Obviously, you, as you said, like you can use, you know, the ballistic approach with the balls, or, you know, you can probably do the hang cleans with the kettlebell. Like there's always a way how to get this like power ballistic work in.
Yeah, I think with you certainly need, you know, a good level of motor control and sort of proprioception, understanding and awareness of your body before you start doing ollie lifts. There's nothing worse than seeing, you know, a complete beginner with no strength training background trying to do ollie lifting. And as I say, from, you know, as wonderful as the Olympic lifts are, and there's nothing quite like them really in terms of you know, of you know, various aspects, but I think what we're saying there is for most people who come into the gym with the goals that they've got, everyone can achieve those without doing the Olympic lifts. If you want to learn the Olympic lifts, then that's cool. You know, it's great sport. It's great, you know, being able to, you know, overhead squat a weight and snatch a weight, and, you know, I mean, it's an unbelievably athletic skill. You know, and you know, for people who are, you know, sat in offices all day, if you can eventually get yourself to a point where you can snatch a bar, you know, I mean, that's pretty cool. You know, there's some great benefits to be able to be strong enough to sit in a bottom position with a considerable amount of weight over your head. So we're not bastardizing the Olympic lifts. Like we love them, but what we're saying is that, you know, it's probably not necessary for everybody, and just be aware that it's very high skill. So if you've got a beginner who wants to get into it, then what I would say is, like, you know, we'd all believe this, is we're going to develop some strength, we're going to develop, you know, some motor skills, some awareness of our body, and then what we might do is we might drip feed the Olympic lifting skills. So we might break them down. So we might say, right, okay, well, you know, we're going to build up a strength base, but what we're going to do is, let's say we're training for an hour, we're going to do 15 minutes, we're going to do 10 or 15 minutes of doing some mobility work, and trying to get you into an overhead squat with a stick, you know, with a dowel, with a broomstick, whatever. And then for 45 minutes, we're going to do some strength work. We're going to get you strong. We're going to build the motor control, you know, and build a base. And then what we might do is gradually, you know, add in a skill each month or each week, you know. And what I used to do a lot with, we used to do back with KBT was you'd have like 7 or 8 phases to build up towards a snatch. So you might start off with an overhead squat, and then you might move into a slow snatch balance, and then a snatch balance, and then a hip snatch, and then a hang snatch. And then, so you might, with someone who wants to get into Olympic lifts, you big focus on strength, obviously, to make them strong enough and robust enough and mobile enough to be able to do them. And then, but you're kind of keeping them engaged, building the skill of the Olympic lifts. And it's something I think we spoke about in the podcast a few weeks ago was, okay, if we're talking about mobility issues, and if you can't get into a good, you know, squat position, for example, should I not squat? And it's like, well, yeah, squat to the range you can, do a box squat, do a pin squat, you know, heavy, still load it and become strong, but also on the side of that, practice the skill. So you might warm up with a goblet squat, for example, with an 8 kilo kettlebell and sit in the bottom position for 30 seconds and do some reps on that. And then, you know, you're never going to get anywhere if you're just doing that kind of stuff for an hour every session, but then move on to some load with the ranges that you can do. And I think that's quite similar with general pop and Olympic lifting. By all means do it, but just kind of, especially if you're a complete beginner, just drip feed it in alongside, you know, some strength work.
I'd like to add maybe that it would be probably beneficial for people who do CrossFit, as we know that loads of people doing it. I think coming into CrossFit is definitely worth playing with the ollie lift itself before. and probably strongman training as well. And then obviously if you aiming for being an Olympic weightlifter. So that leads me to a question. At what point would Luke as a powerlifter would implement Ollie lift, or would you ever?
For powerlifting, never. Never. If I wanted someone to do some speed work before it would be the easy movements that you said before, so like med ball work. If you want someone to do some speed dominant work, it would be jumps, it would be ball work at the start of a session, perhaps. It would never be the Olympic lift, because I think there'll be some like conflicting positions that might take away from the skill of the power lifts. And it's just not worth the risk to reward that you're going to get from them if you're exclusively want a power lift. If someone wants to just be good at a squat, bench and deadlift and also do some other lifts, maybe I would. I've used them with a couple of field sports athletes, and I think one thing that can be a good thing but also a negative is like the competition element of getting good at cleans relative to like your team sports. So like with the med ball, it's really hard to quantify if you're getting better at med ball. You can hear it and you can see it and it feels, but you don't get this data. But with a clean, you get this like clear feedback that you're lifting heavy. So I think when you're trying to get a group of like, let's say you're working with a rugby team, you're trying to get 15 guys to get better at med ball work and produce maximal force and speed. It's really hard to convince them with the med ball. If you give them barbell and do a clean, it just quantifies if they're getting better, if they're getting faster. And it's that little bit of competition, which a lot of team sports thrive on. That can be taken too far. And you see videos of like 15-year-old kids cleaning like really good weight, but with shit form. So there's a point where it becomes a negative thing, but like the competition element of getting better at the cleans, and then the mentality going into the sessions with the intent to get better and to lift faster, I think can be a beneficial thing as well.
Yeah, I think with team sports, it's like Olympic lifting is like this kind of, you know, it goes around in circles. I think 5 or 10 years ago, everyone was, experts in the field were saying you have to Olympic lift if you're a team sport athlete or a field athlete. You have to do the Olympic lifts. You have to power clean. You have to snatch, etc., etc. Now it's gone the other way, and it's become very sort of unpopular to implement the Olympic lifts for athletes. Again, I think it very much depends on the context, as always, the individual. So if I'm, an SSC coach and I'm working with a group of 20 people, whether that's in a rugby academy or whether that's with, down the gym in a Metcon or barbell club, like it can be quite difficult, if not impossible. If I'm seeing a group twice a week and we've got an hour to train, let's use a rugby academy as an example. Am I going to be sort of teaching the snatch? Am I going to be, implementing that skill when it's new to a 31-year-old rugby player? Probably not. We're going to work with what we've got, the time restraints. We're going to make we're going to do movements where the skill's a lot easier and we can still, produce some good rate of force development. I think, on the contrary, the research does show that in terms of rate of force development, like the Olympic lifts are just, are very, very prolific still. So I'm, I completely understand where coaches are coming from, where they're talking about getting rid of the Olympic lifts for team sports, just field athletes, and just get rid of them completely because they're too hard to coach, they're too hard to learn, etc., etc. I'd argue against that and say that in the right context and the right environment, and with the right coaching skill and knowledge, I can speak from experience. Teaching a hang power clean off the blocks or a snatch grip high pull from the blocks is not particularly difficult with a relatively well coordinated athlete. So again, I think you've got to be so careful not to say Olympic lifting is the best thing in the world or the worst thing in the world for field athletes. It really does depend. Like I will use hang power cleans. I feel like I'm very efficient in them. My technique's pretty good, and I can produce an excellent amount of rate of force development with a hang power clean. Now, my situation might be different because I've obviously learned the Olympic lifts. I've coached a lot of Olympic lifters, but I've transferred that on to other athletes, and they've learned the movement very, very comfortably, very easily. So, you know, I certainly understand the argument to say, well, forget the Olympic lifts, just do, do banded deadlifts, do, trap bar jumps, et cetera, et cetera. And I do completely understand that argument completely. But what I would say is it's not as black and white as that. And for me personally, I feel amazing from a training stimulus point of view when I am adding in some of the, some of those Olympic lifting variations. Now, I won't ever full snatch, and I won't even often full clean, to be honest with you, although I have done before. But doing those variations and breaking them down, what you're doing is you're minimizing the amount of skill that's required. You're making it more simplistic, and you can really focus on triple extension, rate of force development. And I think with the right athletes in the right scenario, they do have a place.
I think you rounded up really good in terms of the context. Like, I really like the comparison of when you have a team and limited time to spend with, whereas when you have an individual. So I think you rounded up perfectly well.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of research done a few years back where sort of mid thigh isometric pulls became very popular. And there was an argument of do we replace Olympic lifts with mid thigh iso pulls and things like that. And what the research showed was, yes, okay, in terms of peak force, the mid thigh isometric pulls, we could generate more peak force than we could with the Olympic lifts, but the rate of force development was higher in the Olympic lifts, and they are extremely high with the Olympic lifts, the rate of force development. So there's more research coming out now where we're trying to compare Olympic lifts and trap bar jumps, for example, and as more data comes out, it'll be interesting to see where that goes. But it wouldn't surprise me if you're looking at more velocity aspects with the trap bar jumps, as opposed to maybe a bit more force if you can hang power clean 90, 100, 110 kilos. So that'll be really interesting to see. But yeah, it's interesting for sure. And as I say, yeah, really depends on the context and the individual. So you could build a fantastic sprinting career, rugby career, anything like that, without ever touching the Olympic lifts. But what I would say is don't throw the baby out of the bathwater, as they say, and just neglect them completely. The devil's in the details for that one.
I was just thinking of the bathwater analogy then when you said that. That's pretty good.
Yeah, does sort of make sense with that, doesn't it? But yeah, so I think pretty much rounds up the question. If you're general pop and you want to do the Olympic lifts and want to learn them, cool, awesome, loads of benefits to be had from it. But build some strength first and slowly build up the skill.
Be prepared that you need certain level of commitment to it, because like how it usually is, we've been there, like people just want to add weight to the bar, but it just doesn't happen that way when it comes to Oli lift. Like I don't want to now like blame powerlifting, but obviously like SBD is a bit probably easier, and people see the improvements quicker. Like when you start doing deadlifts, you probably can pull more on a weekly basis when you're a beginner.
Oh, big time, yeah.
It's easier from a skill point of view, isn't it? But
100%,
yeah. It just doesn't count that quickly with the Oli. Like, people think that, you're just not going to snatch in a month from coming to it like a novice. So that might be the tricky part, yeah.
There was a good Olympic lifting coach, can't remember who it was, but sort of said, he was international level, and said, something along the lines of you can teach Olympic lifting in 10 minutes to someone, but to actually perfect it, practice it and perfect it, takes 10,000 hours or whatever. that's a good point Sonia makes there. Is it does take, if you want to get good at them, it does take a lot of time and a lot of commitment.
This is why if you are doing that, then you need to make sure you're doing other stuff as well, because there's nothing worse than just watching someone come to the gym 3 days a week, doing just Olympic lifts with a broom, doing absolutely nothing else. Like, do your Olympic work, get good at it, learn the skill, but make sure you do something else that's going to actually, in the short term and medium term, is going to actually benefit you, rather than just spending millions of times throwing a broomstick about. Like,
it's so true. It's such a good point. Like, you see a lot of like sort of moderate level Olympic lifters, and I've seen them down the gym as well. Like, lovely technique, really good technically, look great when they're doing it. But they're stuck at snatching 40 kilos and cleaning and jerking 60 kilos because they're not strong. They're not getting strong enough. And again, I wish I could remember who wrote it, but there's literally a piece of research that's come out in the last couple of weeks, again, about the correlation between snatch and clean and jerk totals and squat strength, back squat and front squat strength. And again, I mean, there's been tons of research over that the last 30 years, but there's another one that's come out, and it's just further, and with all the research that's been done, all accuracy. So it's so, if you know about strength training, it's obvious anyway. You can't clean 100 kilos if your best front squat's 80.
Sonia can.
Well, Sonia's the exception to the rule. Really joking. But like, it's so, God's sake, I mean, you see some people with lovely technique, but don't be afraid to lift some weight as well. And there's a reason why the best
lovely technique, and then you crumble under you add another 3 kilos, and then
exactly. You look at the best
underneath it.
You look at the best Olympic lifters in the world, and they're squatting outrageous amounts of weight. You got guys in the 75, 80 kilo range, squatting 300 kilos. I mean, high bar, full depth. It's crazy how strong these guys are. But for some reason, in like more the commercial Olympic lifting world, like, people don't seem to take that on board. Like, it's very, really interesting. So
I think
learn the
that's
skills, they're strong.
Why people don't stick to it when they're like new to it, because obviously you don't see that progress coming out. But there's more to it, as you said, than just like playing with PVC pipe in a gym. Like, that's not how you're gonna get the numbers. But people want to see that, and I think that's why they often say, "Well, it's not really working out for me." But
it's a form of vertical integration, isn't it? Really, like, in a way, you're learning the skill of the Ollie lifts. You're doing your skill work, but don't neglect everything else. Still need to get strong. So that's important. But the research is, again, just like so obvious and so fascinating, that there's just a clear correlation between max front squat and max snatch and max clean. Like, it's literally all within a percent. So get strong as well. Don't just roll around on the grass and play with a stick. Do that, but also get strong.
Say no more.
Say no more. Fantastic. Cool. I think we'll probably look at rounding that up there, guys. Is there anything else you want to add to those 3 questions, or not? I felt like with the first question, again, we could go on forever about that. And I think I could have gone into some more depth about that. But it's if you want to hit us up individually and send us a DM regarding that, I'd be happy to go into it a bit more, because it is it really is dependent on the person. But yeah, hopefully we've answered those questions for you guys. Anything that Luke and Sonia want to add in there?
No, I mean, you can talk about anything for hours, but without the context, there's only so much that you can give. So you gave as much information there as you can without the context of this individual person that sent the question. So I think we gave good answers.
I think, yes. I think it was kind of touching the field sport and maybe how often you train. But as you guys saying, that it really depends on the time you have and what your athletic background and what you want to achieve. So
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
individual.
That's you can have all, you can be someone who goes to the gym and enjoys training and have all the knowledge, about all these things, but coaching experiences where you can really apply that to the individual, which to get the best out of them, which ultimately for me is what is what coaching's all about, isn't it?
What I do.
It's what we do. Fantastic, cool. 3 weeks to opening, guys. So looking forward to it. Luke, Sonia, excited?
Very excited.
Man, so excited now.
Can't believe that you said it. Yes, 3 weeks. That's
3 weeks. Slightly over 3 weeks now, but at the time of the time of recording, but when this is out on Monday, 3 weeks to go. Exciting times. So any of our listeners, if you're interested in finding out more, check out our website, mscperformance.co.uk. All our information about memberships are there. We are taking on a limited amount of 28-day trialists to start with, obviously being a bit careful with, or being very careful and diligent with the social distancing and how many people we're taking on board, etc., etc. But if you are interested in applying, then go on the website and apply for our 28-day trial. We'll get in touch with. No obligation. It's one-off payment. It's a ridiculous amount of coaching and programming and assistance that you'll get for that month. And get involved. Give it a shot. Fantastic. We'll leave that there, guys. Thank you very much for tuning in, and thank you to Luke and Sonia for joining me. And we will catch you same time next week. Cheers.